What eventually became the F-86K originally started out as an advanced project before even 1950 to turn the F-86 Sabre into an all-weather interceptor. It wasn't uncommon back then for advanced versions of planes to start development before the base plane had even entered service, and this was an example of that. The idea was to modify the nose of the F-86 to add in a radar system and create an advanced interceptor. The original result of this upgrade project was to be called the YF-95A, and the intention was to introduce it as an entirely new fighter. The new jet was larger than the original F-86, only sharing a very small quantity of common parts, and it had an afterburning version of the J-47 engine. Enthusiasm for the YF-95, which was nicknamed the Sabre Dog, started to wane a bit, as some leaders would have preferred to wait for the F-89 Scorpion to be ready, so the plane was redesignated to F-86D so that it would appear as simply a follow-on version of the F-86 Sabre. This helped gain political buy-in and approval for the Air Force to purchase the plane, since it could be sold to policymakers just as a natural upgrade on the F-86, rather than as an entirely new aircraft. That happened more than a few times during the Cold War in aviation, with the Tupolev Tu-22M perhaps being the best known and most flagrant example. The resulting F-86D featured a radar system that was fairly powerful for the time, and it replaced the F-86's cannons with a chin-mounted tray of unguided rockets. In fact, the F-86D was the first operational single-seat fighter in the world to replace guns with rockets as its primary weapon system. At the time, unguided rockets were considered better at taking out large bombers, but this was quickly realized as impractical after an incident called the Battle of Palmdale, where an Air Force F-89 Scorpion armed with rockets had failed to shoot down a target drone the Navy had lost control of. The F-86K was an export version of the F-86D that swapped out those rockets for a more conventional set of 20mm cannons and was eventually wired to carry the AIM-9 Sidewinder missile. The K model flew for France, Italy, Honduras, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, and the Republic of China in Taiwan. What we get in War Thunder are 3 versions of the F-86K at battle rating 9.0 in rank 6 of the French, German, and Italian tech trees. In this review, I'm primarily showcasing the Italian one, but all 3 are identical. Its radar is the AN/APS-21. This is a search-only radar set that provides a B-scope in addition to your regular radar display. It's got very wide scan angles and very long scope ranges for this BR, but in practice it's most useful at higher altitudes and within about 40 kilometers. This jet's primary armament is a set of 4 20mm M24A1 cannons with 132 rounds per gun. You get a basic selection of ammo belts, with my usual choice being the Air Targets belt, but if you're a sniper with these things, then the Armored Targets belt or the Stealth belt might be a better pick. For loadouts, you get a pair of Sidewinders, and that's it. The Sidewinder you get is the basic AIM-9B. This is an entry-level caged seeker version of the Sidewinder. It's easy to dodge, has very limited range, best fired within 2 kilometers, and only very basic tracking performance, but you can still get some kills with it if you're careful with your shots. The flight performance of the F-86K can be a bit frustrating at times. Let's start with the good news. After the jet gains a little bit of speed, it has a fairly good climb rate. Really, vertical performance is this jet's strong suit, and energy bleed in a zoom climb or a loop doesn't start to kick in nearly as fast as most other planes in this BR bracket, which is basically a result of its pretty strong afterburner. Its acceleration is decent, again with the afterburner, and it has a good rate of roll in most situations. It's still subsonic, but among subsonic jets, it has a fairly high top speed at most altitudes. That's about where the good news ends. The bad news really boils down to three key problems. First, it's heavy, and its performance is going to suffer dramatically without the afterburner going. Second, the afterburner is very thirsty, and it just guzzles fuel. Your flight performance near the end of a match after you've bled the tanks is going to be noticeably different than earlier in a match when you're still full of gas, and that becomes a bit of a problem, because if you take a lighter fuel load to help your mid-game flight performance, you might actually run out of gas while you're stuck in combat. Third, the thing just isn't that maneuverable, despite the leading-edge slats and its decent roll rate. It just doesn't pull very well into turns, and the controls lock up really bad at higher speeds, but go unresponsive at lower speeds. Almost everything you face can outperform the F-86K in a conventional dogfight, and your best moves, kinda your only moves, are just vertical loops and high yo-yos. Sometimes you can get lucky by using its air brake to try and force an overshoot in horizontal scissors, but if your opponent is paying attention and just maintains their turn out instead of cutting back into the scissor, they'll be back around on your 6 fairly easily and you'll be out of energy. So, risky play. Now, when you take the Sabre Dog into air battles, you need to be prepared for a challenge. I won't sugarcoat it. This jet can be pretty hard to have good matches with. It's at a BR where the meta is still dogfighting with guns, but it can't really dogfight very well, so AIM-9B shots end up getting a fairly high percentage of its kills, but it's only got 2 of them, and they're not very good weapons, so, like I said, it can be a challenge. One of the worst problems, by far, is that it gets up-tiered almost constantly. It's in a BR bracket just below the oversaturation of premiums at around 10.3, and it gets pulled up into 9.7 and 10.0 matches fairly often. This is a subsonic jet with no countermeasures, search-only radar, 2 entry-level missiles, and poor agility that can find itself routinely facing MiG-21s, F-4Cs, and Mirage 3s. Now, with those disclaimers out of the way, if you want to be successful with this thing at its own BR, or in a down tier, one of the best things you can do is take advantage of its top speed and climb rate to just run away from disadvantaged encounters. Try and be a vulture, taking shots of opportunity with the AIM-9Bs, and using higher altitude positioning to line up for cannon passes without getting sucked into individual turn fights. I realize that I'm not showing too much of that in the footage, really just because it's kind of boring to watch, but in reality, it is the most effective tactic with this jet. Now, if you want to mix things in up close, or you get stuck in an up tier against supersonic jets, vertical maneuvers will be your best friend. High yo-yos are still particularly effective thanks to the good roll rate and the afterburner, while sustained horizontal rate fights will usually end pretty badly. Overall, this is still a fairly difficult jet to use, and unless you're an S-tier sniper with the American 20mm cannons, you'll probably want to temper your expectations. Visually, none of the F-86Ks that we have in the game get any custom skins, and the paint jobs are all fairly basic. I've personally just never really liked the look of this plane. Mostly, it's the nose. But the 3D model for it is still well detailed, at least. Landing is surprisingly simple. The plane has a fairly sturdy set of landing gear and a drag chute. You can drop the gear and flaps at about 350 kilometers an hour, and there aren't any real caveats for its landing performance. The cockpit has good visibility and the instruments are easy to find. It's got a good cockpit for War Thunder, but unfortunately the radar scope doesn't work, which annoys me a lot more than it might annoy you. Overall, though, it's not a bad experience with the VR headset. To close out on 3 versions of the F-86K. This jet gets air-to-air missiles, and it's got good engine performance. However, it's not a good dogfighter, it burns fuel very fast, and it's absolutely brutally placed in the matchmaker. The final verdict on the F-86K is that this plane is incredibly difficult to use effectively, and you'll probably replace it as quickly as you can when you're going up the tech tree. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this other one.